Hello and welcome to Talking About My Generation. I'm Herbert Ricardo with Alicia Vassar here and Rich Grego. And today we're going to talk about loneliness. It's a topic that we're hearing a little bit here and there. There's articles being written and everything else. And so we thought that we'd have this conversation and see what we can come up with. But let me go ahead and talk a little bit about, or just mention what pathologists and psychologists describe as loneliness. They say that it's the mismatch between the social connection we desire and the ones that we actually experience. So apparently, we desire certain experiences from individuals, and yet what we are actually experiencing is not exactly what we're thinking that we would like. And in that sense, we tend to be lonely. And of course, this is specifically about how we feel about our social interaction with individuals, and more than likely, close individuals, family and friends. So we're going to talk a little bit about the characteristics, what we believe loneliness is, and what are some of the characteristics that we see that we've read that can maybe even help us a little bit to become less lonely. So I think I'm going to open this up to Alicia, and why don't you share a little bit with us?
So I like the definition that you used because it made me think about what we were talking about prior about kind of technology and people involved with it. But I think I want to start first with, I guess, what I see loneliness as, because that was an interesting definition. Uh, but it's just not having that connection with people, not being able to, it can be oversimplified, but laugh, to talk, to engage really with someone, another being, which I guess you can see there's kind of an update and how I'm viewing, I guess, loneliness because now we do have access to technology. Especially we were talking about AI and how people are using it as a companion. So I think that, what we expect versus what we end up experiencing, a lot of times when you're engaging with a system like a learning AI or like AI, that system is meant to affirm you and be positive and give you positive feedback. So that kind of it fits into that experience that people are seeking. So I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to see what loneliness kind of is for you, how you defined it, and has it kind of changed since that, technology?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Alicia. And maybe Herb can mirror this because we're the same generation. We've gone through a lot of the same life experiences, albeit in slightly different places. But one thing I found interesting about the research that you sent us, Herb, which I really appreciated some of that stuff, and I looked at a little myself, was that as far as gender differences go, right? They talk about them being roughly the same, but sometimes men more so. Interestingly, when I drilled down on that a little bit, I noticed it talked about a lot of the research talks about loneliness, what they call subjective loneliness in women being reported higher. Maybe again because women who are lonely are more in tune with that kind of stuff, right? And willing to report it. Whereas they reported higher, I guess what they call objective social isolation in men, which also makes sense, doesn't it? Right? Because that's the way men are. And they'd be less likely to identify social isolation as loneliness. Or maybe because they maybe men are more comfortable being socially isolated than in a sense than women are. Women really are, I think, more sociable creatures, right? Than men are in many respects. Maybe that's too broad a generalization, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, Alicia. But just in terms of my experience of loneliness, the other thing that I found in this research when I drilled down a little bit more is that reported loneliness gets higher again with men as they get quote unquote older, right? They pass into the phase of life that sure Herb and I are just getting to. I'm there, and Herb is sort of just getting to. We're looking toward retirement. We're starting to, in a way, scale back. Well, Herb never scales back. I'm in a way scaling back from a lot of things that I've done before, and I socialize less since retirement and stuff like that. So, and I can see why you become, and plus I think just become, as you become older and wiser, you become more sensitive to your own feelings. So I don't know about what you think about that, Herb, my sense is that I'm more sensitive to what loneliness is and what it's all about than I used to be when I was younger. I think I was much more comfortable with, not that I was ever that socially isolated, but with it. So that's a long-winded response.
That's interesting because the article I was reading, it was talking about, and something that was brought up and then by Dr. Ricardo, is a lot of times older people are dealing with loneliness. There's an epidemic of it. I think
Yeah,
I was reading a
yeah.
New Yorker article. It's on AI is about to solve loneliness, and that's a
Mm,
problem,
yeah.
from Paul Bloom. And he talks about half of Americans over 60 say they feel lonely, and was talking about how disability and all of these things that go hand in hand with aging can contribute to that
Yeah.
loneliness. Um, but also on the part about the difference of the way that women and men report loneliness, I think is really crucial, and the way that we
Yeah.
socialize men, because this is something that I've heard from my generation as well. Not only like yes, older people are dealing with loneliness, but I've heard a lot about men, especially young men, going through a sense of isolation. Um, and I think a lot of that has to go with culturally. We do have this expectation that men are more solitary. I think of like the stoicism. A lot of times, uh, I call them dude bros because that's kind of how they see, I guess, this philosophy. But they take it very seriously, and they take it to a level of independence, which I guess is a very Western kind of thing. Is not being codependent on people and being hyper independent. So I think there is culturally a lot of things that do affect us loneliness wise.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why, you have a lot of you have this phenomenon of incels, right? Is that what they call them?
Yes.
I don't know if we should explain that phenomenon for the audience, but the incels among men, you don't hear about incel women, right? It's a male phenomenon, and that has a
But
lot to do with
I think
mental.
that's interesting. That kind of shows us, because I was talking to Dr. Ricardo about how social media seems very similar to the way that we're looking at AIs. Like, is this going to solve our communication problem? Is this going to help us?
Yeah.
And I think to certain extents it does, but then there's parts where for incels, which are involuntary celibates, they're basically groups of usually young men, who just have written off life. They say that there's no way they're going to be able to find a partner, find love, and achieve those things. So they kind of just all congregate and are sad together, which
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
sense, it could bring community and bring people together. However, it's a very toxic environment where they, from what I've seen, promote just it's a very toxic environment for your mental health. Uh, Affirming what they're believing overly, and just saying that it's doomerist. There's nothing we can do. So it's like on one point, it's bringing these people together, but it's bringing these people together in a way that is unhealthy for them.
Yeah, very good, both of you. I mean, right on key and right on target. And certainly, as we get older, there's no doubt that we don't have as much interaction with so many different people as we're getting older, and we're moving away from the workplace, which is historically where we get a lot of that
Yeah.
environment. And then also, if we're parents and and we've got children, then we're friends with the parents of those children. So there's that. So as they get older, they move out. But loneliness in general, it's a characteristic that hits all generations, men and women, and some of the research. What was really interesting was that almost identical. Whereas before, there was a lot of evidence talking about that it was more men than women because women are more sociable. They find somebody to talk to and talk about how they're feeling.
Mhm.
But but I think what's happening, certainly with the advent of technology, is that technology is pulling us away from the human contact. That's number one. And then number two, when we go onto social media, it's telling us almost in a way that we want to hear. And when I say we want to hear, it's not that we actively want to hear, but we're passively receiving that information about how we should behave, how we should act, who our friends should be, where we should be in life, what's our social economic environment. And so if we've got any form of slight low self-esteem, if we're not that sure about ourselves, and then we get this constantly, again, like Alicia, like you were saying, you're in that environment with your friends they keep supporting what you think, then it's hard to get out of that. Whereas I think many years ago, certainly a few decades back, when you were lonely and somehow you shared that with someone or people noticed that about you because technology wasn't taking up so much of everybody's time, they would come to you, right, and pull you in. And so I think loneliness is spending more time in our minds today than ever before. And I think it's because of
Yeah,
technology. Now, again, technology, like Alicia and I were talking earlier on, things like Zoom for older people has helped them see their grandchildren, seeing their children,
yeah,
when they're so far away and they don't have the money to travel to see them, or they're sick and they can't travel, whatever that might be. So that has actually elevated and actually pulled them out of that loneliness in that particular generation, right?
yeah.
And then the other thing too is technology also does afford the ability for individuals to use Zoom at any age to interact with people. And then that's another way they don't feel lonely. Here, look at us. The three of us are miles and miles away, and yet we feel a good sense of camaraderie and we like our conversations and everything else.
Yep.
Although at one point we do see each other physically, though, too, right? We do have that
Mhm.
interaction, which I think makes it even richer. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so the question is, as we look at this, what are some of the things that um, we think might be able to help an individual who feels lonely, maybe from our own perspective, maybe from some of the perspectives that some of the research that I've sent out. But what are some of the things that we think that individuals can really benefit from in order to feel more inclusive and step out of themselves a little bit and interact? Maybe Alicia?
I definitely think it's finding community because that was definitely something for me that I found is I could not I didn't want to engage with people when I was dealing with a lot of loneliness and stuff. And one of the
Mhm.
things that definitely helped me was finding people that had similar opinions, similar things. One of the things that I don't know if it was one of the articles you shared or maybe our outline, but you brought that there is a lowering of attendance or people participating in churches or community kind of activities.
Sure.
I remember watching a documentary or something with my mom, and it talked about how her generation, which would be she's Gen X, I think they had like the highest participation in volunteering for high schoolers at the time. And I think it's probably only gone down more and more. And I think that's kind of really important. That finding a sense of connecting with people. And that's where I kind of have that hesitation with technology because on one hand, it does help make it easier. It does make it we're miles away, different things we're able to, pop on here, have our conversation and connect in a lot of ways. But I think using it as a tool is much more is a better way of going about it than having it wholly replace things. Because a lot of times I see like people want to not want to engage with people, so they'll end up going to things like technology and AI and stuff, which they're not going to have those community beliefs. It's going to tell you what it wants you to hear. So I think actually engaging with things that you're passionate about and people who are passionate about those similar things is a really good way to step out of that loneliness.
Yeah. Rich, in some of the in some of the writings, the some of the great philosophers, philosophers, I think, are lonely. I think they spend a lot of time in their own mind. And I don't know, right? And I'm not,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
all I'm going to say is from
Mm,
me reading John
mm.
Stuart Mill,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
many of
It's
these
very
different,
good.
and so in doing so though, but again, what are they doing? What they're doing is there's a thought there of identifying um, why we exist, identifying
Yeah.
what's our purpose, identifying. So even though they might be lonely, and some, again, you can be alone and you can be lonely,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I would say that they're almost lonely too, because I think sometimes when you look at other people, you can be a critique of other people, right? Why are they behaving the way that they are? I'm not that way. And then what happens is then you remove yourself from that.
Mm,
Instead of, for me, when I see somebody behaving a certain way or whatever, of course, I'm not going to approach somebody who I don't like exactly what they're doing,
mm,
but I become more inquisitive. Okay, and through being inquisitive, I move closer to that person. Then I end up suddenly I meet a friend. I meet somebody who I have a common interest
yeah.
with, and then that person is another one. Then that person another one,
Mm,
and I know I have a lot of friends, and I'm
mm,
lucky for that. And I enjoy that, and I enjoy what the friendship means to me, and I hope that I'm a good friend too.
yeah.
And so that helps me. And I just wonder, but I know that not everybody feels that way.
Well, you work at it in a sense too. I mean, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's not like work. But I mean, sometimes it is. I really sense. I mean, we know
Yeah.
each other so well,
Oh, I do.
and like you said, we joke. Herb and I, Alicia, we joke all. You maybe too, if because whenever he goes away to like Europe, to teach or anything like that, we always talk about what it may be a labor of love, but what a labor to some extent it is just keeping up with all his social engagements and all his social contacts. It's burdensome. It exhausts me just thinking about it, and it exhausts him sometimes too, literally physically. But it's not something he wouldn't want to do. And I think if you look at it's interesting when you talk about philosophers and philosophy being a loneless, solitary, sort of lonely profession. If you situate it in time and you look back through history, that really wasn't always the case, right? And across cultures, if you look at ancient philosophers and ancient philosophy, um, look at Socrates, who's the quintessential founder of it all. Every discipline traces, right? Social sciences, psychology, philosophy traces their history back to Socrates. And all that guy did was wander the streets of Athens, go to
Right.
parties,
Right.
and talk to people. It was all in conjunction. It was, and his philosophy is all conveyed literally. It's not as a solitary thinker proclaiming these truths in isolation for you to read. It's dialogues, right? It's a story with dialogue that you have to get into to understand his relations with others, and those philosophies reflected that. I know Aristotle defined human beings in his psychology as social animals. That's how he defined human beings. So, right off the bat, right? Yeah. But then you get to modernity. Once you cross that line into the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution, the commercial revolution, and life starts getting the way it is now. Then all of a sudden you get thinkers that start that, then you get these philosophers who live in isolation and think in isolation. It starts with like Rene Descartes talking about, you know, he literally locked himself in a stove, a dark stove, so he could think in private and see if there was anything that he couldn't doubt anymore. I mean, how much more of a symbolism for isolation can you get, right? And then he comes up with this proposition, I think, therefore I am. Again, isolating. And then short step from that to guys like Friedrich Nietzsche and Camus, Albert Camus, who
Yeah,
you and I have talked about,
big
whose
fan.
whole themes are about existential isolation and alienation from the
Right.
world. So I think it's kind of a, if you look at that again, you know, I'm always locating these things in history and in culture, but I think to some extent that and the kind of thinking that comes from it are a sort of a cultural, social, historical phenomenon that we're living through. Even psychologies, right? The ego psychologies that are
Right.
famous are
Yeah.
these modern, from Freud to Abe Maslow, right? It's all about you as an individual, right? Making the most of yourself, self-actualization, and all that
Right,
stuff.
right. When I talk to people, and especially when I'm speaking to my students, and I talk about the difference between introversion and extroversion, and
Yeah,
an introvert is basically happy with themselves,
yeah,
and people tend to think that introverts aren't in social environments, which they clearly are, and
mm,
they'll even enjoy them.
yeah,
But at one point, being around too many individuals and humans at one particular point will exhaust them, and they need to
yeah,
retreat, and they've got to rejuvenate their batteries.
yeah.
Whereas an extrovert loves the social environment. And what's
Mm.
interesting is when I talk about this, almost everyone believes that they're really an introvert, that they're not an extrovert.
That's
You know,
interesting. Yeah,
and I
yeah.
mean, and it is interesting to me
Mm.
because um, we really are not that much. There's only a small percentage of people really. Now, having said that, I'm wondering if we're moving towards that, though. I'm wondering if we're moving towards not wanting to be in a social environment. And I'll give an example. I think if you think back 30 years, 20 or 30 years before the advent of the cell phone and all the level of technology, you would go into a restaurant and you would have people mingling around and talking and speaking and and conversing about certain things or whatever. Or you wherever you go to a gym and you'd work out and you'd talk to the odd person or whatever. And now you go to what we consider these social environments where everyone's got their iPads or their ear why can't I can't
Earbuds,
oh,
earbuds.
I'm so sorry, earbuds. Okay, so they got their earbuds in if you're at the gym. They're
Yeah,
on the phone if they're at the restaurant.
yeah.
And and then you'll hear their conversation. They're having this conversation in a public environment.
Mm.
And of course it becomes even louder
Yeah.
and more to me almost more intrusive. So then what does that happen? What happens? It kind of forces individuals to say, you know what, I don't want to go to that place. I don't want to go where that's the environment. So then, you
Mm.
become more of a recluse. And so the question is, and again, I don't want to I'll keep harping on technology. What I want to do is really try to think about, what can one do? What can we do, recognizing that we're not spending time with people? Because the other thing, the other side to it is that people do feel better when they're around people. When they're around people who they like to be around, they do feel they like to make a friend. If you ask somebody, do you like to make a friend? Most people will say, yes, I do like to make a friend. I like to find out, different things and everything else. And so, I'm hoping that, you know, over the last 20 years that we've been moving up into a more advanced technological environment, that we start looking at the human relationship better, and that's what we're seeking instead of seeking the AI bot that mimics a
Yeah.
human but is
Yeah.
not exactly that imperfect the way a human is.
Well, you know, like what you said, Alicia, I think. I mean, in response to that, in terms of how you overcome, you find communities of people. Now, I guess you can, and you could, and maybe that's what someday will happen. You can find AIs that are sophisticated enough to be interested. They're going to be interested in whatever you want, right? So they could be your community. But to me, whether it's via technology or in person, you correct me if you think I'm wrong. I mean, because you're again, you and your generation are the masters of this. You can generate genuine community, right, through these technologies, I would think.
I think it's interesting, as you were talking about ancient philosophers and uh,
Mm,
brought up Camus and all of that's going much more modern,
yeah,
but we're going all over time, and these philosophers are in different times, but they deal with loneliness. Like I know Kierkegaard, a lot of his work was
yeah,
around loneliness, and he
mhm.
was from, I want to say, the 18th century.
Yeah,
Um,
1800s. Yeah, yep.
so there is this sense that we have been doing this, humans as
Yeah.
creatures. We've been avoiding
Mm,
connecting with people, and it wasn't obviously Kierkegaard didn't have social media in the way of, he had some modern
yeah,
technology and
yeah.
uh, but not to the level we have now. So I think that's kind of something that's innate in us that we have to kind
Mhm,
of see what is it? Is it the friction, which I
mhm,
see AI taking away? Uh, there isn't that friction of communicating with people. One of the things
mhm,
that was also brought up in like the outline was a lot of times people don't have the time to be able to connect the way that they want to. Maybe they have a job, maybe they have multiple jobs, maybe they have a family they're taking care of. There's so many different responsibilities that you have.
mhm.
You're not able to have the time to be able to connect in those environments. So I kind of wonder if there's some other larger cultural kind of things, or just internally kind of looking at, oh God, internally we're going to stay lonely, but kind of
Yeah.
introspection of why is it that we're having so many troubles connecting. I don't think it's just the technology that's stopping us. I think there's something inherently about us that there's a friction that comes up that people aren't able to connect the way that they want to. So they're seeking it out in things like technology.
Good point. Do you think and I asked this because you just brought to mind what feminist philosophers who have an interesting angle on this from our era have said about this stuff. But do you think, I mean, as a woman, do you think there's a gender component to that too?
I
You
do,
think
but also
women
I found it
communicate differently than
I
men?
think it was interesting because I think the way that I worded it was women appear, or there's an appearance that women will have less loneliness because they're able to get access to a lot more emotional connection. They're not given that idea of stoicism,
Mhm.
independence.
Yeah,
Those aren't usually traits that are placed on women.
yeah,
But at the same time, I think if you look, there's still large rates of loneliness between women. So even though we're allowed that
yeah.
medium of connecting emotionally with people, we're still not finding that full fulfillment or getting rid of that loneliness.
And it's getting worse, apparently, right?
Yeah,
Statistically,
that's what it seems like
generation
for
after
all
generation, it gets worse.
generationally, everything.
Yeah, yeah. Interestingly, though, and I'll just if you look at those, Kierkegaard's a great example. That was again, you bring up these great philosophers. I wish I had you in one of my classes. And Kierkegaard's a great example. Camus, Nietzsche. You run through all these lists of guys, and there are ancient philosophers as well, pre-modern ones that understood loneliness, and you could tell we're thinking along those lines. Um, Stoic philosophers, as you also pointed out, tended to, and that's one of the reasons I think what if you look at two popular sort of in terms of popular media, you'll find sites devoted to different philosophies. The two most popular ones I see are Stoicism and existentialism in the modern world, and I think that's one of the reasons for it. But you look at female philosophers, and again, there aren't many of them throughout history for obvious reasons, for the same reasons there aren't a lot of philosophers. Well, there are, I shouldn't say that because there are philosophical traditions across cultures, rich ones. But there aren't a lot in the West of non-white male philosophers for obvious reasons. But if you look at modern feminist philosophers, they don't talk a whole lot about at least not loneliness to the extent that they're dwelling on existential alienation. You don't have a lot of female philosophers writing novels like The Stranger, like Camus' The Stranger. Herb and I was talking about, and in case you don't know about the novel, anybody who's listening, look it up. It's a famous novel if they didn't make you read it in high school. It's about a guy who feels alienated from the whole world, and he finally shoots somebody. Again, Herb remembers it better than I do, but he commits some senseless act. Interestingly, very, very apt novel for our era. He commits a senseless act of gun violence, basically, right? So, you don't read a lot of those kind of. Correct me if I'm wrong. You guys are well read. I can't think of a lot of novels like that from women, right?
I that made me think of something that James Baldwin
Hmm.
spoke a lot about is isolation. For him, it was his queerness, it was his
Hmm.
blackness in America at
Hmm.
the time that
Yeah.
made him feel so isolated. He left the country to Paris. Um, and it sounds very similar to the kind of notes that Camus is hitting on of that existentialism.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
only other kind of philosophy or thought I could think of is bell hooks.
Hmm.
But her focus is on that kind of connection of getting people
Hmm.
to connect with each other, finding love, finding community.
Yeah.
So I feel like she kind of reflects kind of an antidote to it.
Good point. And Toni Morrison, too, if you're familiar with her. I've
Yeah,
done a
yeah.
lot of her. Same thing, right? I mean, she confronts issues like loneliness, but in a much different kind of way. It's always about, it's embedded in interaction and interrelationships with people. So yeah, I think that's interesting. Um, Gosh, there was another great novel or story that just brought to mind when you mentioned it. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to
Well,
build.
jump in when you think about it. Whenever
Yeah.
that comes to mind. Again, so the other thing too is um, loneliness is a feeling that we have, right? It's one of those
Mhm.
feelings that we were born with, okay? And whether we talk about happiness and sadness and frustration and jealousy, I mean, we go through all of these. I mean, these are all mental genetic traits that humans have, right?
Yeah.
So, and of course, what we're doing is we're talking about loneliness, which, and I think very apt, as a, for lack of a better word, in a kind of a negative way, right? And too much of
Hmm.
anything can clearly be difficult to live with. And so I wonder, two things, because I keep asking, what are some of the things that we can do
Mhm.
to help ourselves in the lonely environment? And I think I think we need to look at two sides to this. One is I'm feeling lonely. Why am I feeling lonely? People feel lonely in marriages. Okay. What is it in relationships? Doesn't have to be married in relationships. I feel lonely in this relationship. Why do I feel lonely in this relationship? Well, it's a relationship. There's two people. You're part of sharing with your partner how you're feeling. And again, back to the whole thing, that can be a little bit messy. But I think if you were to share that you're lonely, I think that would certainly diffuse any kind of um, um, you know problem that the other person would feel that they have, right? And so there's that characteristic, and then the other characteristic is how long have you been lonely, and how long are you lonely for, right? Because again, I think almost everybody in parts of their lives at one point feels lonely. The first time you go to college and you're sitting in that, your bedmate, your roommate hasn't come yet, right? And you're sitting there and you're going, I wonder what college or university is going to be like. All right, first time in the military where you're around all these people and there's a lot of people around, but you're still feeling lonely inside because you're not around your family, friends, right? And people are yelling at you. You don't know what those experiences are. So we shouldn't discount loneliness and recognize that loneliness plays a role in our system, and also what it should also do is should trigger us that when we are lonely, okay, I'm lonely today, but I most of my life I'm not lonely, right? And so that's okay. But then I'm starting to feel lonely for too much time. Too much of my time is loneliness. And I need to find a way. I need to interact with others. And then the other thing too is I think that that we have a part to play in making sure that our connections with people that we identify whether they're lonely.
Mm,
I don't
mm,
know that we should always put the loneliness on the person who's feeling the loneliness. I think we should be more engaged and connected to our friends and family so that we can try to identify. And again, I know it's a deep dive there, isn't it? Because suddenly, we're talking about, or I'm saying, hey, we have a part of a responsibility to stop somebody from being lonely. And but I kind of do. What do you think, Rich? No?
yeah, I mean, you guys, you tell me, but it's almost like, it sounds as though you're also suggesting that in small doses or just recognizing it as a part of life and going and living through it authentically, that loneliness can be and I know psychologists say this, loneliness can actually be a very beneficial, healthy dimension of life for a lot of the reasons you're saying. It can cue you into what's going on in your life. It can make you fall silent and be more reflective, which is really important, and most people don't have time to do. And it can attune you to the loneliness and suffering of other people much better than living in constant pleasurable distraction can. I don't know. What do you think, Alicia? It just seems that way, and it sounds like you've really reflected on it deeply from your own life and stuff.
I think you brought up, Dr. Ricardo, a really poignant thing that people don't think about is that you can be in a relationship and you can be lonely. You can have family, you can have friends, and you can still have that feeling of loneliness. And it just feel like there has to be a level of introspection of what am I seeking? Because a lot of times, and I think this is where technology and social media can kind of distort that. We have a feed that shows us what our friends are doing, what they are doing, how they're living their life. And there's things like fear of missing out or a feeling that you're not at that level of other people. And then that's kind of like a self-enforcing isolation. It's more isolating. They're not like me. I'm not like them. Um, so I think there's even if we're around people and we're actively putting ourselves around people, I still think there's a mindset there of not connecting with the people that's important for truly nipping loneliness.
Why do you think, I was going to ask you, Alicia, but for Herb too. I mean, if you've been lonely in relationships, whatever they were, why? What was the cause of that? Why were you lonely? Why, despite those relationships, which may have been close and intimate ones, what was it that made you lonely?
So I didn't have a ton of experience dating prior to my boyfriend, but I've been the experience of I have a large family, blended family, not my immediate family, but my grandparents split up and they have two separate families. They adopted my aunts. So I have a ginormous family. I have cousins everywhere and all these things. And I would still find myself into bouts of loneliness, even with my family who I've lived with since obviously I was born. Um, there's just this not connection in the same way when I don't feel that loneliness of sitting down and having a conversation with my mom about something that we really enjoy, connecting over something. It's just the cursory, we're just life is going by.
Mm,
Maybe
mm,
we'll end up seeing each other in the kitchen and it's just
mm,
I guess you fall into these kind of patterns where you think, okay, what is there to talk about? What is there to do?
mm,
Um, and if you're not conscious of it, then you can sit there, you can be in a place where you're around other people, but you're not. It's like you said, or I think it was Dr. Ricardo, you're in a classroom, you're around a bunch of other students that are relatively, if you're in a classroom, they should be relatively within the same kind of major field, things like that. You would think that would be a place where you wouldn't be lonely, but
Mm,
because it's new, you don't know these people, you're not connecting with them in the way that you uh, ought to kind of really find fulfillment.
mm. So I guess mindful, I mean, just I was thinking about our last show or second to last show on mindfulness. Maybe that has a lot. Being with people mindfully is
Yes,
different from
yeah.
just being there. So I don't know. What do you think, Herb? You're the font of wisdom in this.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. Yeah, it's interesting, and as you asked Alicia that, I'm thinking, I'm reflecting on myself, and I've been pretty lucky in my life that I rarely have felt lonely, and I have felt it, and I do, and when I say rarely, I mean I'll go through a couple of days,
Mm.
maybe a week or so, but that's
Really?
about it.
Wow.
That's about it.
I don't know where you have the space to be lonely. I'm dead serious. I don't, if you're a busy person, but then again, I guess as you guys are saying,
Well,
maybe it depends on the kind of busy you are.
yeah, and you know what, and I think that's an important question and comment because even in my business dealings, whether I'm working
Yeah.
with in an organization and working with individuals,
Yeah.
and um, my students aren't my friends because I don't hang out with them,
Yeah.
but they're part of the citizenship
Yeah.
around,
Yeah.
and they're part of a community. They're part of us. And so every single student that I have 200 students currently, and anyone that I meet, I'm interested in them. I'm interested in why they're taking the course, what they're interested in and so um, then the interaction that I'll have with them, the interest that I'll have, then when I'm home, I'll be thinking about that. I'll just be thinking, and so versus I would imagine that there are people who feel alone again, probably because they going back to the idea behind what loneliness is their expectation of interaction is not what they thought it would be.
Mm.
And I can honestly say that a lot of interactions are not what I think they're going,
Yeah.
but I create that. I know that. So that's my expectation. In a way, the expectation is there is no expectation. If that makes
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
sense. And so you're not, I'm not, being I'm not annoyed with a circumstance or an environment because I wasn't expecting. Now, I can go to the gym and hear people on the phone or whatever, and that'll annoy me. But again, that's not again. Where's the sense of loneliness there, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think that's really what it is. I think that we really have these expectations versus that, I'm a person here and um Dr. Ruth, the sex therapist or whatever, she would say people would be feeling sorry for themselves because they don't have a mate. And I think I said this
Mhm.
last week, and would say, get off the couch, get off and go out there and find yourself a mate. If that's what you want. Same thing about a job. You want a job, you want a better job, then get a better skill, whatever it happens to be. Um, and again, of course, it's harder for some than it is for others. But I think these are the things that we can do. Recognize, okay, if I'm lonely, and this is what I would, if I had the opportunity to talk to anybody and say, if you're lonely, seek people out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just for just as a personal aside or addendum, I was thinking, and Herb knows this dimension of my existence very well. At one point I was a full-time professor at a face to face, teaching classes face to face like Herb in a college up here. And I lost that, but I switched from that job in a sense basically to an online teaching online. I lost that job. I got another job teaching online full time. In a lot of ways, it was great. It was extremely isolating, though, especially compared to, as again, Herb knows, when I was active as a professor, I was socially really active. My house was a center parties all the time, and Herb was at a lot of them. And we went out. I organized gatherings. We had all kinds of organizations at the school that I helped form. So I had this real big social constellation around me. And when I switched to teaching online and that lifestyle, and then we had a few other things happen in our family. I had dependent family members that wound up requiring full-time care and things like that. I really started to have this socially isolated lifestyle. And it has kind of, since then I was teaching for many, many years online full-time and have just retired since then. So it's kind of that sort of culture change has kind of persisted. But one thing, just apropos of the way we started this conversation, talking about the possibility of socially isolating or socially liberating technologies, the consistent social interactions I have during the week. I thought about this the other day. And I see people and stuff once in a while, I call people, see friends and stuff, but the consistent social interactions I have are this talk I have with you guys weekly. I have a radio show I'm on twice a month. And I have a website that we do podcasts. We interviewed Herb on that, as a matter of fact. We do podcasts that we get together for like once a month or so. And those are really, and they're with really great people that I have a lot in common with, as you suggested, Alicia. And we have a great sense, and I have obviously a really good sense of not only community, but interpersonal camaraderie through those things. So, I mean, I don't know if that's a good example of what you guys have been talking about, but I think maybe it is.
I think it's a great example of the use
Yeah.
of technology, and
Mhm.
and you've been able to replicate your friendships and your connectivity through the use of technology. No
Yeah, yeah,
doubt,
yeah.
and of course, Alicia had mentioned that. So there's no doubt. One of the things, though, that was in the statistics too, that I just wanted to bring up and just make sure that we're all aware, is that 40% of people who work out of their home uh,
Yeah.
and use technology um, basically for report that they're lonely.
Yeah. I
And
can see that.
yeah, and we clearly can see that, right?
Yeah.
And people all want to have, I want to work remotely, I want to work remotely. Yeah, it sounds good and it sounds like you can do whatever you want, but again, part of the workplace, and of course this is my wheelhouse, organizational behavior, industrial psychology, is that we create an environment, we create a work culture where it's a good social environment, that it's a positive social environment,
Mhm.
that it's a supportive social environment, just like schools and churches and
Mhm.
families. That's what it is. It's part of that whole network of different environments, and this one where
Mhm.
we're working together. I always, when I'm working with executives and people who have the opportunity to adjust their culture, to do it in a way so that it encourages individuals to share about themselves.
One other quick question. Do you think that workplace environment has suffered the same fate as we've been talking about with the larger cultural environment that it's part of? That people at work are less social and less have fewer meaningful interpersonal relationships and things like that? I would think so.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that in the last 2 decades, there has been a slowly eroding relationship. Just because, again, I mean, just think of the how you work, the fact that you're in your office And instead of going to somebody's office and taking a piece of paper and saying, "Oh, here's the
Mm,
document you wanted," you're
yeah, yeah,
emailing it to them.
yeah,
They're two doors down.
yeah,
Right. And of course,
yeah,
when we
yeah,
don't
yeah,
want paper, okay, we don't want paper, whatever.
yeah,
Or you want to have a conversation. I don't want to get on the phone. I don't want to get up and see them. I don't want to get on the phone.
yeah,
I'll just send
yeah,
them an email. So now you're sitting there for 6 hours,
yeah.
and your body, your back, your legs, everything else is, all jacked up and everything else
Yeah.
because, yeah, sure, and for whatever reason, and of course we tell everybody how busy we are and everything else, and that's unfortunately that's the truth. We're
Yeah.
busy, but how productive are we? And you know,
Right.
and
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
pulls out of that social environment.
I would also think maybe the change, just the whole change in, I mean, it's almost like really the disappearing and it's a scary thought when you think about it. But even when you and I were still growing up, Herb, and that was at sort of the tail end of that era when you literally had a world in which people would expect to go to a company and work in that company and get benefits and be a sole homemaker and then stay in that company for an entire career and then be able to retire with the benefits that they got. Those days are really gone, aren't they? I mean, I don't know how, you know, and
Yeah.
that I would assume would also detract to people's feeling at home in the workplace. So,
So that also, gosh, you remind me of a conversation or of a number of conversations that I've had with people living here in Florida. One of the things that they say in Florida is that it's difficult to meet your neighbors because
mm,
it's such a transient state. People get
yeah,
and they move
yeah,
multiple times. I mean, even if they'll move out, they'll move. Me, 7 years ago, I lived in another
yeah,
6 years before that. I was in a different place.
me too.
You've
Yeah,
moved in a couple of
me too.
places and everything else. You
Yep.
think about Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York,
Yeah.
Minnesota. And again, I'm not saying that people don't move, but it seems that in communities and in environments where people move more and don't get to know their
Mm,
neighbors and don't build strong relations with the person down the street who owns that particular store or whatever. Again, there's a bit of isolationism that's happening within yourself just because of that versus being part of the community versus not feeling part of the community. Alicia.
I think that's why it's so important, and it's kind of one of the starter places I think people should look for when they're having this feeling of loneliness,
mm,
because that a lot of people don't think about. I think it's interesting you brought up that thing about Florida and it being a transient state, because I thought of it from a generational perspective. My parents have a great relationship with their neighbors, um,
mm,
and that felt like something very much unique to their generation. Um, Give or take, obviously being Gen Z, or even on the cusp of it, we're not homeowners by any large amount of means. So maybe we don't, that's why we don't make these connections in the same way. But it
yeah.
does feel like older people are used to these community connections, going over to your neighbor's house and asking for sugar or something. I feel like I'm so unique that I've gotten that actual experience. My grandparents sent me next door to go get sugar from the neighbor, and it feels like that's not really something people promote as much, or it doesn't feel like it's as active. It feels like we're a lot more isolated, and that could be just the cultural climate that we're in right now.
Yeah. Your
Mm,
neighbors might shoot you.
that's right.
Likely.
Exactly went through my mind. You don't go and knock on anybody's door. You don't.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
even if it is your neighbor, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, just great conversation. Again, I think that we thoroughly enjoy it, and we hope that people who are listening are enjoying it too, because we believe that these are topics that we think about, people in general think about, and everything else. And if you can find some form of support and gain any kind of ideas on how to make your life better through these chats that Alicia and Rich and myself have. Well, that's terrific. So, again, no reason for anybody to be lonely. We are here. We every week. Okay, we'll send out a little note and everything else. And if there are topics that you all are interested in, let us know. But Alicia, have a great weekend. Have a, just
Labor Day weekend.
yes, it's going to be, yeah, it's definitely going to be a long one for us. And Rich, maybe I'll get a chance to see you this weekend. That would be
Good,
wonderful.
hopefully.
So,
Okay,
so that'll be great. All right, everybody else, take care and keep it between the lines. All right,
cheers.
cheers. Thanks for hanging out with us today. We look forward to next week as we cover another cool and fun topic. This podcast was produced by Three Lions Production and sponsored by Consulting and Training. Until next time, keep it between the lines.